All right, I'm Scott Bosse. I'm the Northern Rockies Director for American Rivers, and I was asked to give a presentation on the values for which we think the Gallatin River and some of its tributaries deserve the ultimate form of protection in the United States, which is protection under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And before I get going in my presentation, I just want to acknowledge I work within a larger coalition of groups called Montanans for Healthy Rivers that includes some of the groups that are here, including the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, Gallatin River Task Force, and we've reached out to many other interests that are in this room. So everything I say here should be attributed to the coalition and not just American Rivers. So for a river to be designated as wild and scenic, it's really simple. It has to be free-flowing and have one or more outstandingly remarkable values. That's a term invented by Congress in 1968. So I'm going to talk about what some of those outstandingly remarkable values are within the Gallatin River drainage, and I'm going to stray a little bit from our project area, include some other adjacent areas, so forgive me for that. Joe just talked about the fisheries values of the Gallatin River system. He mentioned that the native salmonids in the system are West Slope cutthroat trout, Arctic grayling, and mountain whitefish. And I think he also made it pretty clear that the number of streams that in the Gallatin drainage that have those native species is really, really low. This is just a Google Earth map that shows a layer with West Slope cutthroat trout presence-absence. So basically where those fuchsia-colored lines are, there has been presence of West Slope cutthroat trout documented, but it says nothing about the genetic integrity of those cutthroat trout or the abundance of cutthroat trout. The reason why we think West Slope cutthroat trout are so important is they're a really good indicator species or barometer species because they can only exist in the cleanest, coldest waters. And so we know that where there are West Slope cutthroat trout, we kind of have our highest value waters, which is why we use those as an indicator of a stream that might be deserving of wild and scenic protection. Obviously, there are tons of wildlife values associated not just with the Big Sky area, but the river corridors within our project area. Grizzly bears frequent this area up in the Taylor Fork drainage. If you do any hunting there, I'm sure, Kevin, you can probably tell stories. There are probably 15 to 20 grizzly bears. They hang out around the river corridor quite often. Elk, there are about 1,000 elk in the Gallatin Canyon herd. Probably in another month, there'll be about 10 fewer due to people in this room. And bighorn sheep, the Spanish Creek herd, which is we see parts of the Spanish Creek herd down along the river. There's about 140 to 150 individuals, and in the wintertime, they have a high fidelity to the river corridor because that's where some really good winter range is. Recreational values associated with the Gallatin River and its tributaries. Obviously, fishing on top is a huge one. I was running through some of the numbers recently. There are about 100,000 angler days a year on a big year on the Gallatin River, and I think that's about accurate this year. If you use the economic figures that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks uses, and you assume that half the angler days are non-resident, the Gallatin River fishery is worth about $52 million a year. If you assume that 2/3 of the angler days are resident and only 1/3 are non-resident, it's about a $40 million a year fishery. So ballpark range is probably a $40 to $50 million fishery annually. Rafting is also a big economic contributor in the project area. About 20,000 people a year just take commercially guided trips. That doesn't include people like me that float the Gallatin often on non-commercial trips. That contributes about $4.6 million annually, and that was as of 2006. It was in the EIS that Montana DEQ did for the Outstanding Resource Water designation. And of course, hiking is another frequent activity that occurs along our rivers. So not only are these recreational values important to our quality of life in the Big Sky area, but also very important to our economy. Scenic values are tremendously high, and along the Gallatin River, this is just upstream south of Big Sky. One of the main values for which rivers are frequently designated as wild and scenic across the United States is their scenic values. It's kind of hard to quantify that, but as the Supreme Court ruled on an important case on pornography, you kind of know it when you see it. So based on some of those values that I just talked about, Montanans for Healthy Rivers has come up with a citizens proposal for new wild and scenic rivers across western Montana. So we're actually looking at about 700 miles of rivers within 13 river systems. This shows the Missouri Headwaters Watershed. And I don't have a pointer with me, but if I had one, I'd point to the right and I'd say we're looking at the main stem Gallatin River from the Yellowstone National Park boundary down to Spanish Creek, the Taylor Fork, as well as Porcupine Creek, which doesn't show up on this map. Also within the Missouri Headwaters, we're looking at Bear Trap Canyon as a potential wild and scenic river. And for a river to become wild and scenic in Montana, it has to be designated by Congress. So it's a pretty big deal. It takes a pretty long time. And I'm going to focus in on some of those rivers in the Gallatin drainage, some of those river reaches that we're looking at. Again, since it's a 90-degree day, I figured I'd put a winter picture in here. We're looking at the main stem Gallatin River from the Yellowstone National Park boundary to Spanish Creek. It's about 40 miles in length on that reach, most of which is on federal public lands, but certainly there's a fair number of private inholdings on it. The entire reach of the main stem Taylor Fork. If you haven't been up there, how many people here have never been up the Taylor Fork? Don't be ashamed. Raise your hand. Okay. Just a couple. It's pretty awesome. If you don't spend time up there, I suggest going up there. It's a magnificent stream. And this is Porcupine Creek. And originally, we did not have Porcupine Creek in our citizens' proposal for new wild and scenic rivers, but a lot of people around Big Sky told us that that's a stream that they'd like to see protected. It's really popular for hiking, for mountain biking. It's got tremendous wildlife values as well as scenic values. I'm on my last slide, so I know I'm going to make it, Karen. Take my time on this one. So a lot of people ask us, what does the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act do? It does 5 major things. The first thing it does is a designated wild and scenic river. Its free-flowing character is forever maintained. That means you can't dam it, you can't build large levees along it and constrain it laterally either. So that is the number one form of protection that a wild and scenic river gets. The second one is water quality must be maintained or even enhanced where there are problems. The caveat with this is the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act really only affects federally permitted activities. So if there's oil and gas drilling or mining proposed along the Gallatin River on the Gallatin National Forest, and those activities would negatively impact water quality, that's where the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act would kick in. When it comes to state permitted activities of the type that we've talked about in previous presentations associated with development in Big Sky, that there's not a federal nexus there. Okay, so I wanted to make it really clear that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act protects water quality in terms of federally permitted activities. Third, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, it authorizes a federal reserved water right for that river that's junior to all existing water rights. And Pat knows more about this than me, but I think that the compact between Montana and the Forest Service regarding water rights pretty much makes that provision of the wild and scenic protection irrelevant in western Montana. Really important, for each river that's designated as wild and scenic, it has outstanding values that are identified. I went through a lot of those: fish, wildlife, scenery, geology, recreation. There's all sorts of values. Once the Forest Service, in the Gallatin's case, identifies those values, there can be no federally permitted activities allowed that would degrade those values. Okay? That doesn't mean those activities are prohibited. It means they're restricted so they no longer negatively impact the outstanding values. And last but not least, every river that's designated as wild and scenic has to have a comprehensive river management plan. That's a real opportunity for the local population to weigh in and say, this is how we want our river managed. And a comprehensive river management plan generally lasts for at least 20 years. So a lot of people say, well, I'm a little nervous about wild and scenic designation because I'm afraid of government control. But actually, the Act provides a mechanism, a comprehensive river management plan, that mandates that local people get a voice in the management of their river. So I like to argue that it actually gives local people more say in how they want the river managed. So with that, I will just bring your attention to these Wild and Scenic Rivers Act frequently asked questions sheets that are in the back. There should be enough for everyone. And also, if you want more information, the Montanans for Healthy Rivers website is an abundant source. It's healthyriversmt.org. Thanks.